This is Keys to the Shop, episode 265, Gaining Clarity About Transparency, with Jonas Lorenz. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for the show. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I really appreciate it. If you haven't yet subscribed to Keys to the Shop, just go ahead and hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and you'll always be updated when new episodes like this one come out. And if you would also rate or review this show, if you love what we do here and you've really benefited from the content, give us a 5-star rating or a review over at iTunes. That would be very helpful, and I'm so thankful for all of you who have taking the time to do that. It's really not too much time to do, just a click away. So thank you very much for that. And be sure to share these episodes with people that you think might be able to benefit from the content. Now, Keys to the Shop, on top of doing this podcast, also offers consulting for you and your business. That means if you're just starting out in the industry and you need to get started on the right foot, you're opening your own coffee bar but need some guidance and want someone to walk you through the process, Keys to the Shop Consulting can help you. Or if you are an operator with an existing business and you're looking to scale your operations, improve your operations, just generally level up as a coffee retailer, Keys to the Shop can also help you there. I would love to schedule a phone call with you to explore in more detail how we might be of service. If you just reach out via email, Chris@keystotheshop is the email to use for that. That's CHRIS@keystotheshop.com. Now, Keys to the Shop is brought to you by the people supplying you with amazing commercial coffee equipment. That is none other than Prima Coffee. Prima Coffee is one of the best in the world at supplying you with espresso machines, grinders, brewers, under-counter refrigeration, the whole shebang, really. And one of the reasons they're so good at this is not just because they curate the best equipment from all over the world, but they also work to match that equipment with your specific needs or your context. And let's face it, when you're opening a business or you're expanding your business, one of the biggest expenses is the equipment itself. And you want to know that the people selling you the equipment are going to be in your corner the whole way. And that is exactly what Prima Coffee does. To let them know that you came from this show, go ahead and visit the website prima-coffee.com/keys. And you can also get 5% off your entire order by using the code KEYS5 at checkout. So a really generous offer using the code KEYS5 at checkout at prima-coffee.com/keys. And if you're in the market for commercial equipment, again, I don't think you can get better than Prima Coffee. Today's episode is also brought to you by the Pacific Barista Series. The Barista Series is a plant-based performance beverage like no other. Pacific has built the Barista Series for baristas and with the feedback of professional baristas across the globe to make sure that it performs on your bar the way you really want a plant-based beverage to perform. Your customers are going to love the fact that it stands up to the heat from the steaming process. Any of the beverages in their extensive line will create amazing texture for latte art, and it will keep the flavor of the beverage focused on the coffee. With plant-based beverages continuing to skyrocket in popularity and outperform milk in many, many cases, you want to serve your customers the best, and I believe that the best out there is Pacific. So go to the website, pacificfoodservice.com, check them out, get it in your store, and try it for yourself. If you really want to serve the best, then I think the choice is clearly going to be the Pacific Barista Series. Okay, everyone. Well, today we get to explore a topic that is really critical to the industry, and you've definitely heard this term being used throughout the industry, transparency. People have transparency reports as roasters. People are interested in the idea of transparency in terms of trade and making sure that we know what's going on from farm to cup, and all of this in an effort to create a more sustainable industry, most especially for the farmer. But like a lot of things in coffee, where there are movements and terms and certifications and tools to use to make a difference, if we're not clear about exactly what we're talking about, it's hard for us to make progress using that thing. And we definitely want to be able to use transparency as a tool in an effective and meaningful way. And that is why we are talking with Jonas Lorenz, who is one of the co-authors of The Pledge, which is essentially a common code for transparency reporting in green coffee buying. It gives people an opportunity to really create a meaningful transparency movement, create a community of best practices around transparency and responsible trade. The goal of this pledge is to ensure a sustainable supply of coffee by working towards a living income for producers so they will continue to invest in the future of their business. And of course, that's good for all of our business. You have some of the world's best roasters who have signed on for this pledge, and it's definitely gaining in momentum. And that's why I'm really excited to talk to Jonas today. Jonas himself works for a small specialty roaster in Germany, and with a degree in political science and being introduced to coffee back in 2010, Jonas has really been dreaming about ways to combine the ideas of direct trade, quality, and appreciation for the product that we have in specialty with the farmer-centric, fair share of the profits, and respect for people and planet approach of the fair trade movement. And coming together with others and authoring the pledge created an opportunity and an opening to do just that. And that's going to kind of be what we talk about today as we discuss with Jonas the issue of transparency, why it's a problem in our industry, and how exactly we should be thinking about and approaching the subject of transparency. No matter if we are a small or a large roaster, when we can define transparency in a meaningful way, put it into practice in our operations, and make it part of the larger system of how we make a positive impact in our communities and our industry, really great things happen. And so this is a really great conversation, and I think you're going to get a lot out of it. So let's get right to it. Here now is my conversation about transparency with Jonas Lorenz. Okay, Jonas, welcome to Keys to the Shop. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. How are you today?
I'm very good. Thanks for having me. I'm quite excited to be here.
Well, I am very eager to talk about this subject because, like the topic of sustainability and other terms that we are faced with a lot in the industry, we need to get a firm grip on what it means and how it applies to us. And transparency is one of those things that could mean 100 different things to 100 different people. So I think a great place to start would be to talk about how the pledge was thought up and why and how it was formed. What was the catalyst for this, and what are you hoping to address with it?
The pledge is a project that came into being when a couple of folks who'd been in the industry at the forefront of transparency started talking, and transparency has been around for a little bit. And so what the pledge ultimately aims at is defining transparency. You have to look at what happened to the concept of direct trade, which started out about 15 years ago and used to be a very ambitious thing, but kind of got co-opted along the way because there weren't a lot of guidelines. And what the pledge is doing is trying to provide these guidelines for transparency. There are about 8 authors of the pledge who got involved along the way and just felt the need to define that term in a meaningful way for the specialty coffee industry. After we thought about that for about a year, we came out with the concept in July 2019.
Okay, so defining the terms of transparency for the industry, and you mentioned how direct trade was co-opted by, I guess, opportunistic companies wanting to ride the bandwagon in order to market their coffee well. I mean, I guess the question would be, why is that? We want people to take on something like this. We want people to take on transparency, and we see more transparency reports and from companies all over the world. What is the importance of setting up guidelines, and what are the consequences of sort of letting people co-opt this thing and turn it into something that's not well defined?
Well, transparency is a very broad term. So on the website, we describe it as something very similar to the word freedom. So it's positively connotated, but not very well defined. And in the coffee industry, you could talk about supply chain transparency, telling people where your coffee is from, which is fine, but what we feel is important is to talk about price transparency, and to be more specific, green price transparency for reporting on FOB prices. And if people are just using the term transparency for marketing terms, it's very hard for customers to whom this is obviously a very difficult concept to separate the bad sheep from the good sheep, basically.
Okay, so in the bad sheep would be people that are obviously not holding up their end of what the assumption of transparency would be, or in any case, when you're claiming a particular metric for responsible commerce, people are assuming that you've done the work on the back end and they're purchasing it, but unwittingly they're buying something that perpetuates kind of a sloppy approach to it, which it seems like it would hurt everybody. Well, I mean, and it's not like people are doing this 100% on purpose. I mean, what is it that most people, I guess, thinking from a professional standpoint, what is it that most people have a conception of transparency? What does it mean to them, and how might they be wrong? What are some misconceptions that are common that you find with roasters that say, well, yeah, we're transparent, but actually aren't?
Well, I kind of want to take one step back first. So why, I think the question that I would like to, or the conversation I would like to have is to talk about why the industry leaders or the best in class in the coffee industry are approaching transparency or pursuing transparency. And they do this because they feel that in order to A, have a steady coffee supply in the future, and B, provide producers with a decent standard of living, something needs to change in the industry. To do that, they use transparency as a tool. So it's a very farmer-centric approach. If you want to communicate that you're doing, well, good things for the farmer, price is a very crucial part of that. And transparency is a way of moving past marketing language and actually putting numbers out there. I think that's the concept of transparency that we, with the pledge and the signatories of the pledge, are trying to pursue.
Okay, so it's sort of like when somebody becomes a B Corp, they're being certified by an outside organization. In this case, it's a self-imposed set of metrics that are proving that you are doing your due diligence to actually have a meaningful definition of and operating within the specifications of what transparency should mean or actually is, right?
Yes.
Okay, so what are the components then that make up a meaning, like what is a meaningful definition of transparency? What are the components that somebody that signs up for the pledge needs to have in order to be considered upholding the pledge?
Meaningful components opens up a whole different rabbit hole, I guess. Yeah. But I'll start with what the pledge actually requires. As I mentioned, it's about FOB price transparency, and the pledge puts that front and center. For coffees that are considered transparent under the terms of the pledge, roasters, importers, for that matter, any like buyer of green coffee needs to report that number. So the FOB price of the coffee per pound. And then we added some additional metrics that we feel are important to conceptualize that. So there is the name of the producer that needs to be public. There needs to be some kind of indication of quality, which is usually the cupping score. And then there is the lot size that was bought, and also the length of the relationship between the buyer and the seller. Then on the roaster end, to make sure that people don't just report on one coffee, make a huge marketing campaign with that, but are part of or are not transparent about all of their other coffee, we require them to be transparent about the percentage of coffees that fulfill the criteria that the pledge requires.
I really like that. And it makes me feel like there are a lot of people who do, and out of good faith, probably, that they purchase a coffee that is highly traceable. They put all that information out there, but then it sort of dies with that one coffee. It's not really, it's not really having a huge impact on their entire operation, which I guess you would really, you need to change your operating structure a little bit to make a dent in the problem that transparency is trying to solve.
Yes, that transparency is a piece of the puzzle, right? And to make that clear, like, we're absolutely fine with people starting with one coffee. We feel that we need to give people an opportunity to get started and be transparent about that. Like, talk to their customers, tell them that you're trying to be part of the solution and not part of the problem, and you're changing. And if you can't do that for all of your coffees yet, we understand. but you just have to be honest about it.
Right. So you mentioned something else regarding length of relationship with the farmer. Why is that important?
Transparency, as we see it, is something that we call like a negative litmus test. So a price can tell you that everything's right, but it can maybe tell you when things are not right. So there's like a lot more components to a healthy supply chain or value chain beyond price, and relationship is one of them, because farmers don't just need good prices; they need to be able to invest in their business and therefore have a strong relationship that they can rely on. So that's why we included that part.
Okay, that makes sense, because then just like you give roasters a chance to start with one coffee, you expect that they're going to be able to improve their operations over time, and that kind of relationship with a farmer, it seems, is if you have a long relationship with them, you give them stability to be able to get better also in that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've been in the industry for a long time, and you probably know of like the multi-phase problems that the industry has. So like, just to mention something like old coffee trees. In order to achieve decent productivity, producers need to renovate. And in order for that to happen, they need to have a long-term stability so they can invest in their business.
I know there's a lot of people out there, especially those who are really concerned with sustainability, which obviously transparency ties directly into, that are dedicated to really long-term relationships, as long as they can be, with somebody, while balancing what is sellable in the market, you know. So I guess that kind of brings me to the question of, from the consumer standpoint, since we're trying to sell coffee and we want people to buy coffee that is more transparent, I mean, how do we effectively market this when there's already a ton of different pieces of information that we are putting in the sight of the consumer without overwhelming them?
Well, I guess what you're asking is kind of the $1 million question, because that's a very, very difficult part. I mean, people consume so many products, and these questions arise in all of them, you know, and specialty coffee especially is fortunately one of the products that people actually like think about and consume very consciously. So there is, you know, there's hope in that. But it is a very, very difficult thing, because, you know, like, what's a good price in coffee or for a certain coffee? So if I ask you now, how much should a coffee valued at, like, let's say 85 points from Honduras cost? Do you have an answer for me?
No.
And what needs to happen is that with projects like related to transparency, and they're, you know, the pledge is just one little piece. There are other things like the Specialty Coffee Transaction Guide that actually tries to calculate, you know, like prices for different countries, for different qualities, because, you know, like the specialty coffee industry is so segmented with, like, you know, a coffee valued at 82 points is so different than a coffee valued at 88 points, cup quality. You know, so it's very hard to communicate that. But I think, first of all, we need to get some numbers to even like open the black box of pricing and shed some light.
Right.
And I think consumers appreciate that. And then maybe in the, you know, somewhere down the line, we have this like metric that we can compare it to in a meaningful way, that so consumers can see, okay, the industry average is there. If you calculate maybe a living wage to give people, producers a decent standard of living, it should be there, and we are paying this. So it's a difficult conversation to have, but I think consumers do appreciate it.
Yeah, and in some ways, I guess it might also be true that this is something that would be just as effective if it was just internal. So if it was something that you held yourself accountable for, and if a customer asked, you had the answer available, instead of saying, well, you know, I don't even know that, you know. But with something like this in place, you do have it available. So it's going to make an impact, because then your lineup is going to be increasingly transparent if you're holding yourself accountable. I mean, is that realistic, or do we need the accountability from both the industry and the consumer to actually have a realistic shot at making transparency more commonplace?
I think you're raising a very important issue. So what we actually see is that a lot of roasters don't know about FOB prices, because it's not something that is very present in the industry at the moment. And there's a pretty steep learning curve, I think. Once people from the industry side are getting interested in that, they start asking questions. And we've heard of some harsh conversations and some hard realities that roasters that are actually trying to do good are facing. I've had people say that, they were shocked how little was paid for their coffee. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very interesting thing, that like the pledge at the moment is industry facing and not so much consumer facing, because we don't even have the resources to do that. The industry, especially the roaster side of the industry, like still learning a lot of things, and they're trying to improve. There's so many people that actually want to make a difference and want to be on the right side of coffee, and that's pretty amazing.
Why are people shocked? What is it that has blinded us to when people see how little is being paid for coffee? I mean, we're buying coffee all the time. We've been in industry for long enough to maybe assume these things, but why are we shocked by that?
So we are asking a lot of producers. We are asking for like great quality, and like we're asking them to do so many like post harvest things that are just a lot of work. And historically, I think most roasters that are buying via importers, they just know that the price that they're buying at and not what the importer is paying. Mm-hmm. That's a long way to what the producer is actually getting, because I mean, FOB only tells you part of the story as well. But I think shedding some light on that does reveal a couple of things.
I feel like also if we're marketing our coffee very well, our marketing efforts, we know, are going to pay off when people buy our coffee. So it's like you package the coffee well, you've got a slick logo, you've got a website, web store, all that stuff. And you would assume, because people buy on labels and they buy on brand so much in the marketing terminology and copy, that coffee in there is very, very special. And it seems like we've put so much energy into making sure that we've marketed it correctly, but not so much energy into making sure that what we're marketing is transparent or sustainable, or it has at least that price component. It reflects the expected value of the coffee based on your marketing. You almost expect everybody's coffee, the price to be on point for most of it, but it turns out that's not so much the case.
Yeah, and if you look at statistics, I think if you look at the Global Coffee Barometer, you see that producers on average worldwide are getting about 10% of the retail price. And that's the FOB. That's including all the costs that adds up in the producing country. Mm-hmm. So, most people who've been to producing countries have seen that, there's poverty. When I spent some time in Nicaragua and visited some cooperatives there, people told me this phrase that, like, have you heard of the meses de la vaca flaca? Those are the months of the slim cow. So, like, there's a part of the year where there's malnutrition in kids and all of that. So, it's pretty dire.
And that's not an isolated case either.
No, absolutely not. I mean, in 2019, when we launched the pledge, I heard a statistic that about 60% of producers are getting paid less than the cost of production worldwide. And that was during the coffee crisis, where prices were below $1 for the world market price. But I mean, that's below the cost of production. That's not even calculating any decent standard of living.
This all seems like you need to have a mentality that looks a little bit farther ahead than just this next year. You need to think about, if I'm going to pursue transparency or being a sustainable business, you have to have almost a 10-year view of how your business in most of our audience's cases, that's going to be retail roasteries, are going to collectively have an impact on the state of farmers and the state of, the industry overall, just based on your practices as an individual. It's easy to sort of brush these things underneath the rug, right? And continue going on. And it seems like the pledge is a great way to introduce some accountability within the industry. And I wonder, as dire as the situation is, what good signs have you seen that things are actually, or people are making efforts that are going to make a difference and not just in word only?
Well, I think one of the beautiful things that we've seen with the pledge is that I think that the specialty coffee industry, or especially roasteries, are working usually very separately, and there's not a lot of collaboration between roasters, and I think what the pledge has done was it brought a little bit of movement into the industry, and people saw that other people are pursuing that idea of transparency, and that's inspiring. It's empowering, and it gives people leverage, to ask for numbers and all that. So and we've seen great support from importers as well, who are willing to supply these numbers. And so once we get this, once we get the ball rolling, that's the very first important step.
I love that point. It's sort of a mimetic effect. Looking back at our history and realizing that so much of what you see in coffee shops and roasteries is based on what other people have done before. Like, you are inspired by the design of a coffee shop, and so then a coffee shop in the Philippines looks like a coffee shop in Australia or the US, because we're connected. And so it's like you're taking advantage of that connection to create that momentum for change.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, because I think a lot of people in the industry do see the problem, all of the things we're facing with non-sustainable production, let alone climate change, and all of that, all of the results that might come due to that. The problem is that the growing side of coffee is very, very far off. I think what specialty coffee can do in that respect is, because we do sell this conscious product that shows farmers and all that, we can make that connection. We can get the customers interested in the producer side and all that. That's why we can make a difference here. And once people feel they can do that, because other people are doing that, they're moving towards it.
Yeah, and behind that is the risk. The idea that we're going to pursue something is, like transparency, it seems like a very, very big pursuit, which is another reason why I like you saying, you could start with one coffee, just take the first step, and you'll find it's not as scary to approach subjects like sustainability or transparency in your organization. And it's actually attainable. It's just a few conscious decisions that lead to more and more. So I guess the last question I have for you really is that, we're talking about getting more people to sign on to something like the pledge. Speak to the people who want to make a difference with their business, not just in their own community, but in the community of coffee, even far away places where they get their coffee. What are the steps that people should take, even after listening to this conversation, to pursue transparency as a tool in their roastery and in their shop?
Very good question. I think it really depends on what kind of supply chain you're part of. So if you're doing direct trade, and you are actually dealing with producers yourself, you could look at something like the Specialty Coffee Transaction Guide, which gives you an idea of, how much is paid for coffee on average for a certain region of the world and a certain quality. If you share that with your producers and look at it yourself, it's a very good place to start a discussion on how much coffee is worth. If you are having that direct relationship, you can start asking your producers, how much do they need for the coffee, right? Which is, I think, a very important question. If you don't have that kind of relationship and you're buying from importers, I think you should ask them, how much are you paying for this coffee? And ask for data. Once you get that, compile it into a report, send it to us. We'll look at it. We'll help you figure out problems and publish it. Be honest to your customers. Tell them where you can fulfill these promises and where you're current. I think one of the beautiful things right now is that we've moved past this phase where it's either good or it's bad. You can be openly communicating that you're trying to make a difference, and tell them where you can make a difference right now and where you're trying to make a difference in the future.
So you said we moved past it's good or bad, and does that mean that we have enough understanding of the complexity of the problem that there's a little bit more grace we can give each other and ourselves when we're pursuing the solution?
When these issues of sustainability, not just in coffee, but in industry, came more known to public, child labor, all of these abuses of human rights. A lot of companies were afraid to communicate what they're doing, and it was either we have the solution, and then maybe a couple of years later there was a scandal because people didn't have a complete solution, and they were punished for that by the public. And I think now in 2021 we are at a phase where we can say, look, guys, we're part of an industry that has a problem, but we're trying to do better, and here's where we do better, which is a bit more a nuanced approach that I think is appreciated by a lot of customers.
When you're isolating yourself away from the public eye like that, in trying to avoid being roasted, for lack of a better word, I guess, ironically, then you're not contributing to the solution necessarily, and you're probably just doubling down on your impact on the problem or your contribution to the problem.
Well, I wouldn't say that that all of the companies that are not being open about what they do are necessarily doing bad things. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say that, because there are a lot of people who are just pursuing a different marketing language that are it's all about quality, but they're still doing great things. But I think a lot of people who are doing good things should be open about it and raise the issue of what's wrong in the industry, and also show people what they're trying to do better, because all of these issues in the coffee industry, a lot of them are very, very complex, and transparency alone isn't going to solve all of that. But only if we make people aware of what's going on, we can communicate what kind of solutions we are trying to pursue, learn from each other, and open the black box.
Exactly. Well, I'm really excited that the pledge has taken off the way it has, and that you're offering this platform as a means to that end, and that transparency is kind of at the forefront of our minds right now is a really good sign, especially for our industry, as you put it. Not a lot of industries are putting as much effort into things like sustainability or transparency, and so it's great to see momentum happening here. Where can people find more information about the pledge and what you all do, and maybe be involved in it?
Well, you should check out transparency.coffee. That's our website. Right there, you'll find all of the signatories who have signed the pledge, and then you could go to their websites and see what they're doing, what they're up to. And other than that, I'd like to, mention who I've mentioned before is Transparent Trade Coffee, the project by the Emory University in Atlanta, who are having a website and also publishing the Specialty Coffee Transaction Guide, and are doing immensely important work, compiling numbers, making them available to producers as well, translating it to Spanish, to Portuguese, to English. Are trying to do great things in transparency-wise.
Excellent. We'll provide links for those in our show notes as well. But Jonas, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about transparency and about the pledge. I really appreciate the work you're doing, and thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm really happy to see you taking up this issue. And I know you've talked to Klaus Thompson, and it popped up there, and I'm really grateful that you offered to do that for a whole hour.
Well, I hope that you found that insightful and that you were able to get a clearer picture of what transparency is actually all about. And especially that it gives you some motivation to investigate exactly what you can do in your business, how you can apply these principles that Jonas was talking about, and how you might be able to take part in something like the pledge. The more of us take the first step, no matter how small, in the right direction, the more momentum we gain and the better the outcome for efforts in transparency, sustainability, and the thriving of everyone involved in coffee. So a huge thank you to Jonas for joining us on the show. If you want to find out more information about what's going on with the pledge, just go to transparency.coffee and you can learn all you need to know right there. Also, some of the other institutions and resources mentioned, we'll have links in the show notes for those as well. Now, if you have any questions or comments for me about this show or any episode of Keys to the Shop, feel free to send me an email. Chris@keystotheshop.com is the email to use for both that and any inquiries about Keys to the Shop consulting. Again, that's Chris@keystotheshop.com. And with that is the end of our episode. I hope that you really enjoyed this one. I certainly did, and that you keep the conversation going. Have an amazing week, and as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.